Today's daf is daf Yud Ches. We're going to start with the Mishnah on daf Yud Zayin on the base, which is about 10 lines up from the bottom of the Omen. This Mishnah, which follows the previous Mishnah that deals with the laws that are noeg on a case of Yontif on a Friday, on the Erev Shabbos. This Mishnah is going to deal with a case of a Yontif on Motzi Shabbos. And we need one introduction before we learn this Mishnah, and that is what's called Tvila Beregel. Chayav Adam, the Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah Tezayin, L'tayr es atzmo beregel. And the reason for this is Kidei sheyuchal likanes lemigdash v'let kodshim. So Yontif is already associated, of course, with the Migdash, the mitzvah Lil Regel. You want to go into the Migdash, you want to eat kodshim, you have to guarantee that you're tar. And a person is mitayr his kelim so that he could use them during the course of the chag, the tar. And the Mishnah says the following: Chal lios achar Shabbos. Yontif is on Motzei Shabbos. Beit Shammai omrim, you're not allowed to be tovel yourself or your kelim on Erev Chag, which is Shabbos. And this issue would apply, of course, on Yontif itself as well. But rather, matilim es hakol, whether it's man or his kelim that became tamei b'lifnei Shabbos. The tara and the tefillah should take place on Erev Shabbos. Still omrim, kelim, I agree with you, b'lifnei Shabbos. But adam b'Shabbos, a man can be tovel on Shabbos. Gemara is going to explain the difference between tefillas kelim and tefillas adam, and why is it that tefillas kelim is asur on Shabbos. Now let's add another little introduction for the Sefer of the Mishnah. Ochlinu mashkim that became tamei do not have tara in a mikvah. Tefillah will not help. But there is one case in which a mashke called mayim can be subject to tefillah, and that's called hashakah. So, for example, if you have a kli and you fill it up with water, then when you submerge the kli in such a way that the top of the kli, the top line of the kli, is exactly parallel to the water, that's called hashakah, that's called a chibur. And it's as if the water inside the kli was mixed into the mei mikvah, and it's mitar the mayim tmeim from the mei mikvah. Now, the logic behind hashakah is what's called chibur ubita lemei mikvah. Once the top level of the water is connected to the water of the mikvah, add to that, besides chibur, we have what's called bittul. It's as if that water was bottled to the mikvah, therefore it is tar. And our Mishnah is going to deal with the case of hashakah, whether or not it is permissible on Shabbos. V'shavim, both Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai, who have an argument about Tfilas Adam b'Shabbos, but they all agree, even Beit Shammai, she mashikin es hamayim, you're allowed to do ashak on Shabbos, to be mitayr mayim tmeim through the mei mikvah, when they are placed in a kli even. A kli even, a vessel that's made of stone or stoneware, we would call it, is not makabel tumah, and you can be mitayr them up. Below matbilim. But we're not allowed to do this hashak of mayim tmeim and mei mikvah if they are inside a kli eitz, which is tamei. And what he's trying to do is, and that's what the Mishnah is telling you he's not allowed to do, is sort of indirectly be mitayr a kli eitz that was tamei. And he wants to do the tefillah through the process of hashakah, meaning once you're allowing the hashakah, then I could also at the same time be mitayr my kli eitz that's tamei. And that you're not allowed to do, and therefore we're not going to allow you to do hashakah in a kli eitz. The Mishnah adds, umatbilin migav legav umechavur lechavur. Again, this last part of the Mishnah will have to wait until the Gemara. The Gemara is matir on Yontif, what's called hatbola or tefillah migav legav. The Gemara says the following: the kuli al b'miyos. If we read carefully the machlokas between Beis Hillel and Beit Shammai, we will see that although there's a debate about Adam, where Beis Hillel allows it and Beit Shammai prohibits it. But in the case of Kalim, is Kali b'Shabbos lo. You're not allowed to be makbil a Kali. And therefore, everybody, even Beis Hillel, who are Mekil and Adam, are Machmir and Kalim, they're required to do the Tfilas Kalim on Erev Shabbos, my time. And now we're about to embark upon a sugya, which presents four different shitos as to what the reasoning is, why it's prohibited to do tefillah of kalim, according to everyone, on Shabbos. We're not talking about any sort of malacha. Is it a chash that he might violate a malacha? Is it a halacha in Tumah, especially in Truma, Mishmeres Trumosu? What kind of halacha is it? Amar Rav. Rav says, Zera, and here we start today's daf. Yudches Amar Aleph Shema Yitlenu V'Yadav Yavirenu Arba Amas B'Shus Aram. We are afraid of the possibility that when he takes the kli into his hand for the purpose of being tovelit, he may forget that today is Shabbos, and he may carry it 4 Amas B'Shus Arabim in order to get to the mikvah and to be tovel the kli. And on Shabbos, for sure, there's a malacha of hotzah, and one of the manifestations of that Isser hotzah is havaras daled amos b'shus harabim. Amalei Abaye, Abaye raises the following kasha. There's going to be a whole series of objections of Abaye to Rabbah. And the first of which is, Yesh lo bar b'chatzero ma'i kalamema. We never found that it was a heter. We were lenient in the case of a bar, meaning a cistern of water, which is kosher for mikvah, that's in his private property, in his backyard. What should be the Isser? Here, there's no chash that he's going to carry it to a public mikvah by going 4 amos in Rishus Harabim. Amalei bar b'chatzero atu bar b'Rishus Harabim. Even though in a case of bar b'chatzer in his private backyard, there would be no justification and reason for this gzeira. But nevertheless, if we're going to be lenient and allow him to be tovel at a bar that's located in his backyard, he'll make a mistake and he'll come to assume that he can be tovel even in a bar, even in a mikvah that's located in Rishus Harabim. And here the question arises, why isn't this called a gzeira l'gzeira? Number one, we're afraid that he might confuse a bar b'chatzero with a bar b'shus harabim. Number two, and even if he does so, we have to add another chashash that maybe in a bar b'shus harabim he might carry it 4 amos and violate melechas hotzah. And we'll quote here a number of Rishonim, Rabbeinu Tam and Sefer Yosh, the Ritva. They say mibnei bar b'chatzero bar b'shus harabim shem echad lahem. They are both called a bar. And the gzeira was formulated in such a way that you're not allowed to be tovel in a bar. Where that bar is here in Rishus Harabim and is justifiably a chash of havara, or whether or not the bar is b'chatzero, a bar is a bar. And that was the gzeira, not to use a bar for tefillah on Shabbos. But we see very clearly, and this is going to come up throughout the sugya, that according to Rabbah's interpretation of our Mishnah, we're really going to go very far. And any situation which might somehow lead to tevilah of a kli tameh b'mikvah has to be avoided. We're going to really expand the scope of this prohibition to include many peripheral cases that could lead to a violation of this gzeira d'rabbanan, this violation of a rabbinic injunction that enjoins us from being tovel of kli tameh in a mikvah. Abai now adds another concept. We know that the Isa Tfilas Kli Tameh in a mikvah applies not just on Shabbos, but also to Yontif. Why should it apply to Yontif? There's no violation of Hotzah of the Yontif. And Rabbah answers, Gazru Yontif Atu Shabbos. Once again, the expansive definition of the scope of this Zera and this Isa Tfilas Kalim to include even in a case of Yontif, because it might lead to a Tvilas Keli b'Shabbos, which in itself, according to Rabbis, Gzeira Shemi Avirenu Dalaram Tzuram. And once again, we could raise the same question: isn't this Gzeira from Yontif to Shabbos, and from Shabbos to Gzeira? Maybe he'll carry it 4 Amos b'Shus Rabban. Ein Gzeiras Yontif b'Shum Shabbos Mechsheves ki Gzeira l'Gzeira. Yontif to Shabbos is not an extra step, an extra Gzeira. In other words, it's a day that's endowed with Kedushas Hayom. It generates Yisur Malacha. Shabbos is also called Yontif. Yontif is also called Shabbos. It's all one Gzeira that includes every Yom Kadosh. The Gemara asks, again, Abaye, pressing against Rabba Migazrinu, do we have such a Gzeira to prohibit Tfilas Kelim on Shabbos? And the Chachamim, the Machmir, to institute this Gzeira, even in cases where it should be mutter, and it's a kind of Gzeira, V'atnan, what about our Mishnah? It says, V'shavin, even Beit Shammai agreed to Beis Hillel that Shemashikin es hamayim b'kli even litara, that if you have water that became tummy, you want to be retired through the process called hashaka, you're allowed to do so in a kli even, which is not makabel tumah. Avalo matbilim, but you're not allowed to be matbil the mayim that are tummy in a kli tummy like a kli eitz. The im isa, if according to you, Rabbah, the Chachamim was so machmir that they expanded the Gzeira of Tfilas Kelim to include any case that even might lead to Tfilas Kelim, is Nigzar Hashatu Hatbola. If you're going to tell him that he's allowed to do Hashak and a Kliyevin, he'll come to the conclusion mistakenly that he's allowed to do Tvila of Mayim Tmeim even in a Kliyetz, a Klitame. And Rabbah responds by saying the Tizra, which means, do you think that this is a valid objection? If a person wants to be Mitar his Mayim, he Islay Mayim Yafib. If you're talking about case of Mayim Tahorim and the water is pure, it's drinkable, is Hani, Lamali Lemevid do Ashaka. Why would he do Ashaka in such a case? And you're going to tell him that he's going to use Mayim Tmeim, and what does he have in front of him? He has Mayim Tahorim, he could drink it immediately. Ella, for sure you're talking about a case of the Leslie. He doesn't have access to Mayim Tahorim, which are royal Ishtia, therefore he needs Hashak. So in such a case, Kevin the Leslie, since he has no other Mayim Acherim, which are Re'uyim L'Shtia, therefore, Mizar Zarbe, he's going to be very careful with this water that it should not become Tomei. And therefore, even if he has a case where he needs to be retired, it's a very rare situation. And we have a principle that we don't institute Gzeira in a rare situation. So let's go over the logic here of Rabbah. Rabbah says the following. If he has other water that's tar, and it's royal Ishtia, then why is he bothering with Hashaka to retire his Mayim if he has Mayim Tahorim? So the only scenario, the only situation in which he would want to be Tovel his Mayim through Hashaka because it became Tameh is a case with the Leslie. He has no access to Mayim Tahorim that are drinkable. And therefore he has no choice but to be to subject the Mayim to Hashaka in a Mei Mikvah. And therefore, if you talk about a case where he has no other water, then Mizar Zarib, he's going to be very careful that Mayim Ru'uyim Lo Yitmu. In other words, he realizes that he doesn't have an option to be Mitayir Mayim Tahorim, Mayim. And if you're going to say that he doesn't, it came into Leslie Mayim Acher Ru'uyim, right? The reason why he's doing that shak is because he has no access to other water. Mizar Zarbahu, who Nizar Shamayim Haru'uyim Lo Yitmahu. Now, what does this mean? Who nizar shamayim ru'uyim lo yitvu? After all, you're talking about a case of less like mayim ru'uyim. He says in the note here, he says, Lachein afin irish and nitmu. He says, as a general rule, he's not going to need hashaka. He's going to be careful about his mayim, that they should remain tar, so that he could drink it. Drink the water. He doesn't want to get stuck in a situation where he's desperate, he has no water to drink, and he has to do hashaka. So therefore, the situation in which he has no water is a very rare situation where all the water that he has access to is tmeim, and there's no gzera in a milsa de lo shchicha. Davar shenu matzui is lo gozrinon gzera. Esvei Abai asks the following question on Rabbah again. We have a brisa with regard to young, that madlim bidli tame vehu tar. It's allowed to do what's called she'ivas mayim. In other words, he has water inside a cistern, inside a bar, and he's shoev mayim. He wants to draw forth the water from the bar, and he's allowed to use a dli tame for the she'iva of the dli, and as a result, the tame, the kli tame, is going to become tar because he's putting the dli, submerging it into the bar of mayim that are kosher for tefillas kalim. And we're not going to prohibit this because of tefillas kalim and yontif, because again, he's doing it in an indirect sort of way. V'im Isa, according to your logic, Rabbah, that they're so machmir in this gzera whose kalim is nigzar dilma asi lat ule biene. We should prohibit she'iva, drawing the water from the mikvah with a dli tame, because he might come to be tovel the kli tame in and of itself, shalom b'derech she'iva, and then he would have violated the Isa Tefillas Kalim B'Yontif. And Rabbah responds, Shani Hossam, that case is different. When he's doing a Shivas Mayim, Bidli Tome is mitoch shlo hutra lo el al yedei dolyo zacharhu. Once they gave him a very restricted license, and they permitted him to only do this tefillah agav, meaning al yedei dolyo, derech she'iva, but not like any other tefillah when you take the kli directly, put it into the mikveh zacharhu. He'll remind himself that tefillas kalim, if the kli is bifnei atzmutz in and of itself, is prohibited on yontif. But a makbil kli b'shabbos b'bar shebechatzero, or makbil kli b'yontif shelo b'derech she'iva, there's nothing in his action that's going to guarantee to remind him of the Isa tefillas kalim, and therefore the Rabbanon expanded the Gezerah to include even those scenarios. I want to point out that this last brisa that Abai quoted to object to Rabbah is talking about Yontif, not about Shabbos. Let's go on. Abai asks another kasha, raising another objection to Rabbah. Esvei kli shenitma, if a kli became tummy, the avatuma, an avatuma would include, let's say, a zav, a zava, a sheretz, a mace, that is mitame a kli, and an avatum is mitame kalim midoraisa. Now the kli, which was tame through a tumah that was conveyed by an avatum, is tame doraisa. Kli shenitma bevlada tumah mutal at bila b'yontif, in any event, as we'll see in suits later on. And if it became tame through an avatum, may erev yontif, ein matbilin so be yontif. We have an isu tefillas kelim on yontif, but be yontif, if it contracted tumah on yontif itself, matbilin also be yontif. Sharei tefillah toel kidei sheyuchal lechol bo be yontif machole chulin bitar. So since this tefillah is meaningful for him and beneficial for him on yontif, that he could use the kli for chulin bitara, and he didn't have any possibility of being matbil the kli before Yontif because it only contracted tumah on Yontif, is therefore the Chacham would make you for the purpose of Yontif, and they would overlook the chash of Zeres Tfilas Caleb, the Yisur Tfilas Caleb. The Isa, according to you, Rabbi, that we were machmir on these zeros of Tfilas Caleb, to include even cases like Bar B'Chatzero, or cases in which he did it on Derech She'iva, where he did it Bifnei Atzmo. So we should have nixar the Yontif Otu Erev Yontif. We should have said that he may come to be Tovel, the Kli on Yontif, even if it contracted Tumah on Erev Yontif. And Rabbah answers, Tumah b'Yontif milslo shlichehi. Why is it called Yisrael Mitarim v'Regel? Everyone is very careful about not being mitame himself during the regel. So for something to contract tumah on the regel is not common. It's milslo shlicha gozru bei Rabbana. We don't institute exera for something that's rare. Esvei. We learned in the Bryce again. Abai is raising an objection to Rabba Klish and Nitma be'avat tumah. If a kli became coming at erev yontif, a tumah chamura through an ava tumah, the kli is tamim in Torah, ein matbilin osvim, then it's prohibited. But the vlada tumah, if the kli contracted a lower level, a tumah kala with a kuf, which means a vlada tumah, otherwise known as a rishon. In other words, no, actually a vlada tumah would be when a rishon l'tumah was nitma from an ava tumah, now it's mitame another kli, that's called a vlada tumah. And that's an entire rabbinic enterprise of tumah, a category of tumah which is only the rabbanon, because midaraisa, a kli is not makabel tumah except from an ava tumah, not from a rishon l'tumah. So the category called the vlada tumah in Kalim doesn't exist on a deraisa level. It's all a takana d'rabbanon, then matilin also b'yontif. There's no Isa Tfilas Kalim. If Isa, according to your logic, Rabbi, nigzar ha to ha, we should prohibit Tfilas Kli Vlada Tuma in a mikvah yontif, Atu, because the Xeris Kalim in the case where it's Nitma Be Avatu. And Rabbi answers, if the Kli became Tami Vlada Tuma, Hechi Mishkakas, like what would be the case? Where do you have a case where you need Tfilah of a Kli that has the status of a vlada tumah, saying that this kli is only a sheni l'tumah. Sheni l'tumah cannot be metame any chulin. Let's say it comes to contact with chulin. So you don't even need tefillah. Even if you're shomer chulin b'tara, you don't need tefillah of a kli that is a sheni l'tumah. The answer is ella, but rather gabi kohen. Kohen will eat truma, and the halacha is that a sheni l'tumah passes truma. And that is a Mishnah in the second parak of Taharos. So since the Tvila of this Kli is only Shaykh really fundamentally for Kohanim, it doesn't apply outside of the context of Mishmeres Trumos, then as far as Kohanim is concerned, Kohanim's reason him, they are B'nai Torah, they're B'kiyim in Allah, they're very careful about the Allah, and there's no chash that if we are matir the tefillah of a kli that was nitma b'avad tumah, that if we would be matir a kli that was nitma b'vlada tumah, that they would come to be matir a tefillah of a kli that was nitma b'avad tumah. Therefore, the Chacham didn't see any reason to institute such a gzera tashma. Again, a counter argument against Rav, the Amar Rav Chia bar Ashi Amar Rav, Nida. She'ein lo b'gadim, a nida who is wearing b'gadim that are tmeim, because once she wears the b'gadim, they contract tumah. She's an ava tumah and kelim on mitame. And now the time for a tefillah turns out to be on yontif. The ein lo b'gadim torim l'lav sham liachar tefillah. She has no other set of garments to wear that are tahorim after the tefillah. Is ma'aremes vitovelis. She's allowed to use this kind of subterfuge which is called Haramam. And with that, his chakmus, with that very smart Yiddish cup, she can be tovelas bibgadel. Now again, if she goes down into the mikveh with begadim, they are chatzitza, but rather we're talking about a case of begadim rechavim, very wide begadim that aren't attached directly to our body, and they're not a chatzitza between our body and the main mikveh. Isa, according to you, Rabba, we should see here a pirza. Somebody nigzar, if you're going to allow her to be tovel kelim, in this case where she's wearing the kelim, maybe somebody will think that you're allowed to be tovel kelim on Yantiv. Now, in the footnote, he tries to understand why Rashi, Masechet, mentions that this is Yantiv, and on Shabbos they don't have this heter to allow the nida to be tovelas with a begadim. But we should know that the Mordechai and Tosus at the end of Masechet Shabbos, they seem to indicate that this law, this heter applies to Harama even on Shabbos. And the Gemara answers to refute this question, this objection, Shani Hasan Hutra Elayde Malbush. If you're only allowing her to be Tovel Habagadim by wearing them, then Schuri, she realizes that Tfilas Kalim in and of itself, if you would take the Kali and be Tovel, that would be Asur, that would be prohibited. Now we get to another Shita. As we mentioned in the outset, there are many different opinions as to why Tfilah of a Kli Tameh was prohibited on Shabbos and Yontiv. Rav Yosef Omar, Zera Mishum Schita. We're afraid that if we allow him to be Tovel Kalim on Shabbos, and let's say Kalim including Gadim, they're also included under Kalim, then he might come to violate the Iser Schita, and he will wring out the beged of its absorbed water, the mikvah water that was absorbed into the beged. And that be a violation of a tolda of meleches olamen, because chitas beged, when the beged is lach, it's very wet, to squeeze out the water is a tolda of meleches olamen. And he writes here that Asochet b'Shabbos chayav katos, hamachabes v'asochet malach achas. Now let's point out that the Gemara in Sukkah says that with regard to shofar and lulav on Shabbos, everybody accepts the logic of Yavirena, of Rabbah. But nevertheless, Rabbi Yosef will not accept the application of Shemi Yavirenu in the case of the Isur Tfilas Kalim b'Shabbos, because Tfilas Kalim is prohibited even on Yontif when there is no Isur Hotzah. And therefore, Rav Yosef, back against the wall, he has to reject Shemi Yavirenu as the underlying reason for the Isur D'Rabbanan of Tfilas Kalim on Yontif. And therefore, he comes up with Spita. Amalei, so Abai objects to Rav Yosef, just like he had objected to Rabbah. Tenach, it makes sense why you would ask Tfilas Kalim to B'nai Schita Ninu, those Kalim that lend themselves to Schita. Like, for example, God, when Kalim to Lav B'nai Schita Ninu, you have a kli that's made of metal or wood, whatever have you, then Michael, remember, why should there be any Isur Tfilah? Amalei, Gzera Hanu, Atuhani, that Rav Yosef likewise has this expanded Isur Gzera of, all these peripheral cases. And Esvei Kohani Tiyufta, Abai is going to raise all the objections that he raised earlier to Rabb's Shemi Avirenu, to Rav Yosef's Shema Yistatenu, and we're going to give Vishanile Kiddushanim, we're going to repeat all the answers that we gave above. Now we have a third Shita as to why the Rabbanon instituted an Isur Tfilas Kalim b'Yontif. Rabbi Baby Omar, Zera Shema Yashem. We're afraid that on Yontif, a person has a lot of free time. He's not going to work. He doesn't feel the urgency. And if you're going to allow him to be told the kalim, maybe he'll leave the kalim in the state of tumah until Yontif. In other words, during the whole course of the year, he's going to set himself up an otzar, some sort of closet where he puts all the kalim tmeim. Like we have a special place for all the kalim that need hagolah, right? So he puts it all waiting for Yontif when he has free time. And as a result, these kalim are going to be in a state of tumah for an extended period of time. And maybe in the meantime, he may use them for truma. And he'll violate the Isser to be Matami Truma. Tami Kavose Dira baby. We have a Bryce that supports a baby. Klisha Nitma Me'erev Yontif. Ein Matilin also be Yontif. Zera Shema Yishet. That if this Kli contracted Tumah before Yontif, then we're not going to allow Tefillah on Yontif because we're afraid it'll leave around the Keli in its state of Tumah. It might come to be Matame Truma. And finally, we have Rava's explanation. Why did the Rabbanan prohibit Tefillas Kelim on Shabbos? Mipnei she'nira k'mesaken kli. One of the 39 malachas of Shabbos is makeh b'patish, and that means to perfect something that needs perfection. Here too, in a sense, since before Tefillah he couldn't use it b'tara, now he's being misakin at this rectification, this tikkun of the kli for all usage is similar to a malacha d'oraisa of makeh b'patish. Now, even if we take the nirakim misake, we can still be mater ashokas mayim. He ain't isa tikkun ela b'kelim, but not in mayim. The Maram Shif is very bothered by this Sarah of Nira Kemisakin as Rava would have it. First of all, why would they matir the case of Lidlos Bidli Tomit? And nobody's going to know the difference as to whether or not his kavana is to be total, but the Matvil Atzmo, he certainly knows that his intention is to be total the Kli. And that means in his eyes, he's doing a tikkun mana. Furthermore, they were matir to be matil itome that contracted to vlada. And the question is, the spectators, the onlookers, they don't know how this kli became tome, and it looks in their eyes like misakin. And also, why was the Mishnah matir lahatil migav legav, which is a tefillah that minadin he's not obligated to do, and therefore it's not called tikkun. But the roim don't know; they think that he's chayav tefillah, and he looks like being mitakin. And the Maram Shif quotes the Eish Befarshim to answer these questions, and he says that the getter of zera nira kimisakin shehatfila nira v'enei aroim itikun ukimulacha alula havias amatil lasos malacha cheres. B'chol because v'enei aroim ein atfila nires kimulacha kigon b'dalye b'dli tameh. He doesn't know that the kli is tameh. Ein chashash mitzad ha'matvil atzmo. When it looks like tvila to the eyes of the spectator, then we have a chashash that the matvil himself. Kol mikra ha'matvil atzmo yodea shekulasa ein adom l'melacha mo bevlada tuma betuma or betfila shenim mechuyeves badat gav gav is ein chashash machmas haroim ibnei sharoim tamid tolim shezui Tvila muteres. Below gazu ela b'tzir shneim. B'tova shenira b'yeni aroim kimalacha. U'b'makom sheish chashash ha'matvil yovo al yidei kach lidei michshol b'malacha acheres. Now the Gemara says the following: Hachi, I have the following objection to raise against Rava. Adam nami. If you're worried about nira kimisakin, why did Beis Hillel allow you to be tovel yourself, your goof, it's not royal at taros, and now you're being machshir for taros. Why did Beis Hillel permit Tvilas Adam? And the Gemara answers, Adam, if a man is Tovil, it doesn't look like he's involved in Tikkun, in Hechsher Gufo, Ella, but rather Nurek. So during, let's say, the summer months, like we go up to Tzfat and we go into the freezing Ari Mikvah in Tzfat, and we're cooling off from the heat. So we don't have a tefillah that is nikeres, that it's l'shem tefillah for the purpose of Tara. Therefore, lo gozu be'rabban. Gemara says, "Ha'teinach b'mayim yafim." If it's clean water, I understand that they didn't make a gzera to prohibit tefillah in mayim yafim because anyone will say that he's kemeka, he's going in there to enjoy the water. But mayim roim, you have a mikvah that's made up of water that's not royal tefillah. L'rechitza, I mean to say, it's royal tefillah, but not l'rechitza. Ma'ikal meimah. Why, in that case, would Beis Hillel permit tefillah? Why aren't they choshes? That's nirakim esakim. Omer of Nachman bar Yitzchak pa'amim adam ba. A person comes minaderech b'sharav, and it's a very hot day. We use the word sharav here in Israel even today. The rochets, he cools off his guf. Afilu b'mei mishra. Now they used to take flax seeds and they would soak them in water, and the water became mayim sruchim. They were smelly water, and they would be tovil in such mayim roy. And it's not nire kimesake. So this is an answer to defend Rav. And we're saying that we have to include all water, even mayim royim, in this Kesera, because in the case of Sharav, he will even cool off in mayim royim. In other words, in the case of mayim royim, the Gemara establishes that logically we should prohibit, and Beis Hillel should agree to Beit Shammai that it should be prohibited in mayim royim because there's no nira kibiyaket. And Rav Nachman bar Yitzchak is saying that even if in one single scenario we could apply nira kibiyaket, meker, pronounce it right, in mayim royim, then that's enough to take mayim royim out of the gzera. So we're going to stop here on the top of Daf Yud Ches Amid Beis.